What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some Hana Nochi Hare score, which is to say, the sequel show to Hana Yuri Dango, which came out a decade after the Hana Yuri Dango final movie. So that movie was in 2008, Hana Nochi Hare was from 2018. It is an incredible soundtrack, and I've only recently learned that it was composed by 4 different people. So as I go through the individual tunes, there's going to be some different names. A couple names people who follow my reactions to anime and J-drama score will already be familiar with, which is to say, some of the tunes, including the one we're going to listen to right now, C5, were composed by Habuka Yuri, which is to say the composer who worked on the Kurakoshi soundtrack, one of the composers from Kurakoshi. And there's also some tunes by Hirano Yoshihisa, who worked on the anime Death Note score, and I've reacted to some tunes from him as well. So yes, there's a couple other composers who I'm less familiar with, but there are some familiar names that worked on this show. And as I said, we're going to listen to a tune called C5, which, for those who know the show, or for those who are going to take an interest as I do a watch-along of the show on my Patreon, which will be starting soon, the C5 is the Hana Nochi Hare version of Hana Yuri Dango's F4, meaning C5, short for the correct 5, are the elite students who essentially run the student body of Etoku High School, and who are keen to make sure nothing's going on in the school that they disapprove of. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil the watch-along, although I suppose you do learn about the C5 and what they think they're doing right away in episode 1, but I'll be mum for now. I'll just say that the C5 are seen by themselves certainly, and by many or indeed most of the other students, as the rule of law and the ultimate purveyors of the current generation of prestige at Etoku University, I think it's called, but it's like a school that runs from elementary school up through the end of high school. And yes, this track has a lot of energy to it. It's got a lot of intense drama. It's the tune that's used to introduce the C5 to a character in the show, but to the audience as well. And it speaks to perhaps the intensity of the C5, even relative to the F4, who were the same functional group, meaning the F4 ran Etoku's student body during their generation, but they were seen as being very fancy and especially wealthy, and they were all very handsome. The C5 is those things, although there is actually a girl among the C5, whereas that was not the case in the F4. But their dynamic and what they have to do is a bit different. And again, I'll leave it at that for now. But yes, I think that difference is reflected a bit in the intensity of this track. So without saying too much more, let's give it a listen. This is from the Hana Nochi Hare soundtrack 2018, a tune written by Habuka Yuri, and it's called C5, which is short for the correct 5. epic. That was even more epic than I remembered, and even more epic than it felt in the moment when I did the first installment. It's not yet up on my Patreon, but I've recorded the first installment for Hana Nochi Hare, and this tune definitely played during the first episode at least, if not the second episode as well. But, like, because you're focused on the dialogue and the narrative, you know, sometimes a tune, the true intensity or majesty or melody of it doesn't necessarily come across in a more direct way because, again, your attention is sort of split between your different senses. Although I say that, I will suggest that perhaps more than other people, I tend to notice tunes very acutely when I watch things, movies, TV shows, which in part is part of why I keyed in on J-dramas so enjoyably from the very earliest days, now like 20 years ago when I began watching J-dramas, because they use music maybe even more passionately or more comprehensively than a lot of American shows. It's a real central part to J-drama, and that definitely came across early. But the point is, here, listening to this track C5 in the moment, it was really incredible in terms of the composition and the intensity. There's a bit of electric flair, there's a lot of string work, there's that bass guitar, and just some of the, like, sequencing, some of the chronology, those sort of hanging moments, and then it comes back in with more energy. I think it's a really fantastic tune. And again, it's a very broad soundtrack. There's tracks which have a more like electronic dance type of feel. There's lighter tunes with a bit of, you know, comedic fun. There's very deeply emotional tracks, and in fact I almost reacted to a tune in that vein, but I figured I'd start with C5. So yes, ultimately, as I said, there's 4 different composers, so there's going to be some different names along the way, but I'm going to enjoy going through this soundtrack as we go through the watch-along on my Patreon. Do let me know what you think of this tune. I will see you next time. Peace.